All right, this video goes over the notes for the beginning of Chapter 2, Section 2.1. This is very important because we're going to talk about proportions, and we use proportions to solve a lot of the problems for the remainder of the course. So a proportion needs to start with talking about a ratio. A ratio is just a fancy word for fraction. So it's a comparison of the relative sizes of two or more quantities. So if you say there are 2 of A and 5 of B, then the ratio is 2 to 5, or you can also write 2:5, which means that for every 2 units of quantity A, there are 5 units of quantity B. So we talked about relationships between quantities in Chapter 1. Ratios are the most basic form of a relationship. They're just comparing two quantities. So let's kind of start from the beginning, and we're just going to talk about how you can compare things and what are those things that are important when you are given some information that is representing a ratio. And so since you're comparing two things, we need to know what those two things are. So if you say that 13% of US adults are numerate, the word numerate is like the number version of literate, understands numbers. So 13% of US adults understand numbers. What are the two things we're comparing? So we are talking about the US adults that understand numbers compared to all US adults. That's how they're getting the 13%. They are taking 100% of US adults and extracting from that the number that are numerate, and that's where the 13% is coming from. If the annual percentage rate is 6%, then we have to talk about how much interest you're paying based off the current balance, which is the amount that you have invested or the amount that you owe. If your speed is 75 miles per hour, then we're comparing distance versus time. The miles is the distance, per hours is the time. Half of 17-year-olds don't know enough math to work in an auto plant. So we've got all 17-year-olds, and then we get that half number because we are talking about the ones that don't know math that they would need to work in this auto plant. So that's how you're getting the half number, comparing all 17-year-olds to the ones that don't know math. You borrowed $300 and you pay $350 at the end of the month. So you have the amount that you started with, the original amount that you borrowed, and then you have your new balance because you've now added some interest to that. 52% of freshmen say their emotional health is above average. So we need to know how many freshmen there are in total. So all freshmen compared to the ones that have above average emotional health, and that's where they get the 52%. How many are freshmen are there altogether, and then how many of them have emotional health above average. Apple Incorporated reported 9.21 earnings per share in 2017. So we need to know what those earnings are, and then we need to know the number of shares that we're talking about. So for basic ratios, and you'll use your calculator here, but you have to get it set up before you can know what to put in your calculator. So the order is important. So if we have that A is 150 and B is 400, and we want the ratio of A to B, then it would be 150 to 400. So what you want to do, there's a couple different things you can do in your calculator, but let's just start off with one way. So you would type in the 150, and then there's this key right here, A, B/C. You hit that. So let's see, 150. Type the A, B/C, and it kind of gives you a little kind of comma. Then you type in the other number, the 400, and you hit enter, and it's going to give you 3/8. So basically it's reducing this fraction, 150 over 400, down to its lowest common term. So 3/8 would be my answer here. All right, now the good news is that if they're switching it from A to B to B to A, well, the numbers are just being reversed. So if I have the answer for A to B, then for B to A, I just have to flip it over to get 8/3. And then A is what percent of B. So here you don't really need anything fancy in your calculator. That's where you're going to use your calculator to get the decimal and then turn it to a percentage. So you're just going to do, let me write some stuff down. You want the percent. So you just do 150 divided by 400 in your calculator. Hit enter. It gives you the decimal 0.375. To convert this decimal to a percentage, you can either multiply by 100 or move the decimal 2 places to the left. So if you multiply times 100, you get 37.5%. Which again is the same thing as just moving the decimal 2 places to the right. All right, so for B, we want to compare 4 feet to 13 inches. So first of all, we have feet and inches, and in order to compare those effectively, we need to have them in the same units. It's easier to go from feet to inches than from inches to feet to get cleaner numbers. So I'm going to take this 4 feet, and there are 12 inches in a foot. That's just sort of something I expect everybody to know. And so 4 times 12 is 48 inches. So instead of 4 feet, I'm going to use 48 inches. So A to B, that is 48 to 13, and B to A is 13 to 48. And then B to A is 13 divided by 48. All right, so if you try and put the ratio of A to B in your calculator, so we're using these steps right here, so we're going to type in 48, the A, B / C, and then the 13. Because the top number is bigger than the bottom number, it's going to give it to you, the calculator is going to give it to you as a mixed number. And you, some point in your math career, learned how to convert a mixed number to an improper fraction, which is what we really want. In this case, I'll review that real quickly. You would do 3 times 13, which is 39, plus 9, which is 48/13. Okay, but I'm assuming that most of you do not want to do that. So you've got this other number where you can hit, it's above PRB, it's F arrow D, that's fraction to decimal. So from here, if you do second and then you hit that key, it will give you the decimal. And let's see if we do that again. So that might be a problem. There are other keys. Let's see. Let's try that. I'm just going to play around. If we do try that, start from beginning and do 48, the A, B / C with 13, and you get that mixed number. And then above that key, it takes the mixed number to a fraction. So from there, we can hit that and that same A, B / C key and see what we get there. And it gives us the 48/13 because that can't be reduced. All right, now if we go back to the 13/48, okay, if we do 13 and the A, B / C 48, and it's going to give us 13/48 because that fraction can't be reduced. So if you aren't sure, you can always start with the one where the number is smaller on the top and the calculator will give you the answer, and then you know you can just flip it around when the order reverses. All right, so if we go back to 13 divided by 48, and the calculator is going to give us 0.271, and then if you multiply that by 100 or move the decimal 2 places to the right, you get 21.7%. All right, so the ratio of the following simplify if possible. So we would start with 6.6 to 21.6. In our calculator, if we do 6.60 divided by 21.60, so 6.60, and then if we do divided by 21.60, and that's going to give us the decimal. We don't really want that, but we can use the fraction to decimal, so we can hit the second. Let me write it here first. Second PRB, enter. So second PRB, enter, and it'll give us 11/36. Okay, now a ratio is just a single fraction, a single relationship. A proportion is where you set two ratios equal to each other. So we have A over B equals 2/5. So literally a proportion is one fraction equal to another fraction. Setting two ratios equal to each other is called setting up a proportion. You solve by cross multiplying. So the way this looks, you take the top of one fraction times the bottom of the other. So A times 5 is 5 times A. And then you do it the other way. The other top times the other bottom, 2 times B. And this one has two things we don't know, so it's just 5A equals 2B. We can't really solve any further. If you have a proportion, there's four things involved because there's one fraction on the left and one fraction on the right. You can only not know one thing in order to solve for that thing. Okay, so if we have a proportion 6/10 equals 3/x, one top times the other bottom, so 6 times x, and then the other top times the other bottom is 3 times 10. So that is 6x, and 3 times 10 is equals 30. So the cross multiplying gets you here. Then the second and final step here is we need x by itself. So we need to move the 6 to the other side. You move something from one side of the equation to the other by doing the opposite operation. So right now it's 6 times x. The opposite of that would be to divide both sides by 6. Going ahead of myself with the answer. So those 6's cancel out, and then in your calculator, 30 divided by 6 gives you x equals 5. We're going to be doing plenty of proportions throughout this course. A ratio table is a table that allows you to compare various quantities by listing the quantities involved in columns and the proportional amounts in rows. In the first objective, we introduced the birth rate for 11.88 births per 1,000 people. I mentioned we could also compute a fertility rate comparing births to the number of women aged 15 to 44, because they're kind of narrowing down like when women are usually able to give birth to those years, although we know that that can happen outside of those years. The choice of per 1,000 was arbitrary. We could have just as easily report the births per one person or per 1 million person. Keeping track of all the numbers we are comparing gets confusing, and we use ratio tables to organize the information. To compute the new ratio, we use a fundamental technique. We set up a proportion, we cross multiply, and solve for the unknown. So that's what we did here. So here's an example. Set up a proportion comparing the following: a 30 count of liquid IV for $36.46 to a 16 count for how much? All right, so you have choices. We have a count, and we have a price, and we have a count, and we need to know a price. So you've got choices how you can set them up. You can either do count over price equals count over price, or you could do count over count equals price over price, as long as things match up. If this is considered the situation number 1, we would do count for number 1 with price for number 1. or count for number one with price with number one. And if this was the second situation, then we would do the count for one over the price for one equals the count for two over the price for two. Or the count for one over the count for two equals the price for one over the price for two. So it's got to be set up in an organized way, but as long as that holds true, then it will work. You'll still come up with the same answer, and the work won't be any harder, whichever way you choose. So I've decided to just stick with one situation and then make it equal to the other situation. So I'm going to do 30 liquid IV over $36.46 is equal to 16 liquid IV over how much. X is just how much am I going to have to pay for that if this proportion holds true. So here's my proportion, okay, which is me setting it up this way. Okay, but I could have done 30 over 16 equals 36.46 over X. When you cross multiply, you take the top of one times the bottom of the other. That gives you 30 times X. Then we take the other top times the other bottom, and that gives you, when you put that in your calculator, 16 times 36.46, it gives you 583.36. And then the next step is to get X by itself. It's 30 times X, so we want to divide both sides by 30. And our answer is 583.36 divided by 30, $19.45. All right, another example. If you can drive from Virginia Beach to Richmond, which is approximately 108 miles, on 4.5 gallons of gas. So here's the first situation, 108 miles using 4.5 gallons of gas. How much gas would you need to drive to New York City, which is 365 miles away? Okay, so the first situation is 108 miles, needs 4.5 gallons of gas, and it's equal to the second situation, which is 365 miles. We're trying to figure out how much gas that's going to take. So miles to gallons equals miles to gallons. You could also do miles over miles equals gallons over gallons, but you can't mix things up. You can't compare the 108 miles to how much gas or the 365 miles to the 4.5. Okay, when you cross multiply, 108 times X equals 365 times 4.5 is 1,642.50. Then you would divide both sides by the number in front of X, and we get 15.21 gallons. All right, example 3. A survey showed that 7 out of 10 students prefer Moe's to Chipotle. Of the students who prefer Moe's, 3 out of 5 always order queso. If there are 10,000 students, find the number of students who always order queso at Moe's. So this is a two-step process because we have the number of students that prefer Moe's to Chipotle, and then of the students that prefer Moe's, we need to figure out how many of those students are always going to order queso. So the first step is prefer Moe's. So we've got 7 out of 10, and 7 out of 10 students prefer Moe's to Chipotle, and we want to know how many students that is out of the total 10,000 students there are. Cross multiply, 7 times 10,000 is 70,000 equals 10 times X. Then we divide both sides by the number in front of X, and we get 7,000 students prefer Moe's. Then step 2, we're going to take how many that prefer Moe's always order queso. So we've got the 3 out of 5 that always order queso, and we want to know how many that is out of the 7,000 that are going to choose Moe's to begin with. And we cross multiply, 3 times 7,000 is 21,000. equals x times 5 is 5x. Divide by the number in front of x, and 21,000 divided by 5 is 4,200 quarter queso. And that's your final answer because that's what they actually asked you to find. All right, now we're going to look at ratio tables now that we've talked about how to solve proportions. Okay, the number of births in 2017 in the U.S. was 3,855,472. Is that a lot of births? To make sense of this statistic, we can make comparisons to the whole U.S. population, which that same year was 324,459,463, and compute the birth rate per 1,000 people. Given the fertility rate of 60.2 births per 1,000 women aged 15 to 44 in 2017, we can work backwards and compute the number of childbearing women. We organize all this information in a ratio table. All right, so we make comparisons across the rows. So think about like you want everything to match up like in a box or a rectangle. So if I want to find this number B, okay, so this matches over with this, that lines up, right? And these two line up, and these two line up, and these two line up. So everything's kind of, you can't have anything that like crosses over. Like I can't compare, if I'm comparing these two, I wouldn't then match up these two because this doesn't line up over there. So you're kind of going to isolate this if you want to find B and use that to set up your proportion. So you would compare the 3,853,472 births to the total population, and then you would make that equal to B over 1,000, or you could do the 3 million number over B equals the 324 million over 1,000. Okay, it would work either way. And that's how you would find out what B is. We're going to come back to that because we want to, those are big numbers. We want to kind of start with a smaller ratio table that has some easier numbers to work with. Okay, so you can see it's set up very similarly, like we have numbers in all the same places. So this is just basically a starter table using better numbers than what's here, and then we'll revisit that. Okay, so again, you want everything to line up. So 4 in this box line up, the box and 1,000 lines up, 1,000 and 500 line up, and 4 and 500 line up. So you can either do 4 is to 500 over, we'll call this x, over 1,000, or you can do 4 over x equals 500 over 1,000. Okay, 4 lines up with x, 500 lines up with 1,000, and 4 lines up with 500, and x lines up with 1,000. So all those things are still happening with my proportion. When you cross multiply, so 4 times 100 is 4,000, or sorry, 4 times, that's supposed to be 1,000. Okay, 4 times 1,000 is 4,000 equals 500 times x. And we divide both sides by the number in front of the x. And 4,000 divided by 500 is 8. Okay, so what that's saying is if there are 4 births per 500 people, then there are 8 births per 1,000 people. Okay, that might make sense to you already, but again, when you use these numbers up here, it's not going to quite compute so easily. You have to have a more mathematical approach. Okay, compute the number of women in this population. All right, so now this is what we're trying to find. Okay, I'll call that y just so it's a different variable. All right, so this y, the only other thing that lines up in the column is the 900. So I'm going to use the y with the 900. on the row, y lines up with both 500 and 4, but the 900 doesn't have anything in the 500 column. It has something over here. So I'm going to use the 4 with the 12 and the y with the 900. Okay, the 4 lines up with the 12, the y lines up with the 900, the 4 lines up with the y, the 12 lines up with the 900. So it would be 4 is to 12 as y is to 900 is the setup. You could also do 4 over y equals 12 over 900. Cross multiply, 4 times 900 is 3600, 12 times y, then divide both sides by 12, and 3600 divided by 12 is 300. So it's saying that there are 12 births per 900 women, 12 births per 900 women. So there are 4 births per 300 women. Because now we have the answer that goes here. 4 matches up with 300 if 12 matches up with 900. Okay, so now back to the table with the larger numbers. So same idea, the numbers are just more complicated. So if we're going to match up, we want to know what B is, so we're going to match up this number with this number and this number with this number, because this number matches up, lines up with this number, it also lines up with this number lines up with this number, and that number, these two numbers line up. It makes like a box. So we have the 3,853,472 over B equals 324,459,463 over 1,000. And then you cross multiply, so this 3 million number times 1,000 just adds 3 zeros to this number. And you can put in your calculator, of course. And then this number times B. And then you divide both sides by always with the number with the unknown. So we're going to take in our calculator this number divided by this number, and you're going to get B equals 11.88. All right, then for W, so just like we did before, the only thing that lines up in the same column with W is 1,000. And so the two numbers that will line up with these two would be this one and this one. So we'll have the 3,853,472 over 60.2 equals W over 1,000. Cross multiply. Divide both sides by the number in front of W, so divide this number by 60.2, and we're going to get 64,011,163. Okay, so switching over to a different table. This one is about tuitions and fees. Tuition and fees for a private 4-year, a public 4-year in-state, and a public 2-year university or school. Okay, so again, when you're setting things up, you just need to make sure that everything is matching in a logical way. So determine the ratio of private 4-year to public 4-year in-state with the second quantity scaled to 1. Pay attention to the words and the order of the words. It mentions this first, so this is the first quantity. It mentions this second, so this is the second quantity, and the second quantity is scaled to 1. So this is the thing we're trying to find. So this is our proportion right here. $30,094 over X equals $8,893 scaled to 1. Cross multiply, 30,094 times 1 equals 8,893 times X. divide both sides by the number in front of x. So for in your calculator, this number divided by this number, and you're going to get x equals 3.4. Okay, so fill in all of the boxes in the ratio table